My name's Amy Patterson, and I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut Land Conservation Council. I'm not going to take the time to scroll down and view everybody here, but I suspect I know most of you, and I hope that you know us. This program today, like all of the programs that we have offered throughout this online programming series called Conserving Land by Staying Connected, is being offered because folks during our previous calls have raised questions about funding sources that might exist for certain stewardship work. And so NRCS has a number of programs that they can talk with you about, and we hope that this is helpful. I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to turn this over to Rebecca Dahl from our office, who's going to just run through some guidelines for using Zoom, although we really know that you're all experts at this point. And then we'll turn it right over to Joyce and to Carol from NRCS, who will introduce themselves as well. There will be ample time today for Q&A, including the questions that were submitted in advance, most of which will be read by Rebecca, and then we will also be accepting questions throughout during chat, which Rebecca will talk about. So thanks again. I'm so happy you're here, and I'm going to put myself on mute.
All right, so hi everyone. You've heard me do this spiel a few times, but just to direct your attention to the bottom bar of Zoom, I apologize, there's someone mowing their lawn and I just needed a little vitamin D today. But at the bottom left corner of your screen, you should see a microphone symbol with the words mute. If you can just make sure there's a red slash on that by clicking that, making sure your microphone is muted, that's going to make this presentation seamless for everyone as well. And as always, we love seeing your faces when you come in through, but if you could move to the right of that mute symbol, there's a camcorder symbol, and go ahead and stop your video just to conserve some bandwidth here for the flow of our presentation. Following along that bottom bar, if you move to the middle, there's a speech bubble icon with the word chat. I see lots of folks are turning their videos and muting, so thank you. If you see the word chat, go ahead and click on that. You'll get a chat box window that'll pop up. And if you have any questions at any point through the presentation or during our Q&A portion of the presentation, please enter them into the chat. I will go ahead and read them on out. And again, if you have any technical difficulties, feel free to enter those either through the chat or sending me an email. I'll be looking at that as well. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Joyce here from NRCS. Thanks so much for coming.
I'm just going to jump in for 1 second to note that, at least from my perspective, Rebecca was cutting in and out. So if you missed anything that she said and you have some questions, put that into the chat, and either she or I will get back to you immediately. All right, thanks again, and here's Joyce.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. It must be a really tough decision joining this presentation or being outside on a lovely day like today. So thank you for taking the time to join. I was asked by the Connecticut Land Conservation Council to give a presentation on some of the NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Service programs. And I'm going to focus on the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, also known as EQIP. It's currently our flagship program here in Connecticut and mostly around the nation. And I felt it had the most utility and benefit for land trusts to participate in the Environmental Quality Incentive Program. So from this point forward, I'm going to call it EQIP. Okay, so I'm going to give you a definition of what EQIP is. EQIP is a program that provides financial and technical assistance to agricultural producers to address natural resource concerns and deliver environmental benefits such as improved water and air quality, conserved ground and surface water, increased soil health, and reduced soil erosion and sedimentation, improved or created wildlife habitat, and mitigation against increasing weather volatility. So that's quite a long definition, but that's what our definition of EQIP is. So EQIP is voluntary conservation. And in order to carry out voluntary conservation, we base that on a conservation plan. And a conservation plan is the basis for technical and financial assistance. It's developed in partnership with the landowner and the operator. It's what the landowner wants to do to meet his or her objectives on the land that he or she owns or manages. So it's a record of decisions of what should be done on that land, what their goals, what their objectives are. So in order to create a conservation plan, what you would do with our planner is you would do an assessment of the resource concerns on the operation. So we would look at all the resource concerns like soil, soil erosion, soil quality, water, water quality, water quantity, air, greenhouse gas, odor, particulates, plants, the plant health, plant pests, if there's invasives, insects. Under animals, we would look at the livestock limitations and wildlife habitat. And energy, we can address energy efficiency, which would be energy conservation, not new energy, and pollutant reduction. So a conservation plan provides alternatives for implementing practices to address identified resource concerns. The operator, the owner, decides the final scope. They're the ones in control. It's their plan. And it then can be used as a basis for application to NRCS for financial assistance through a variety of programs. So I'm going to go over our Connecticut NRCS EQIP priorities. And these priorities reflect our national priorities. And these Connecticut priorities have been teased out, or there's been input from a state technical committee that has had input into our priorities here in Connecticut. So it's not all from the top down. Our state technical committee members and attendees have an opportunity to relate what some of their concerns and priorities here in Connecticut are for our state conservationists to develop their program around. So the first one is soil quality. And that goal is to improve the health and function of soil, to increase production, sequester more carbon, improve water infiltration, reduce erosion, and improve wildlife habitat. So I'm going to list like 4 or 5 practices that would meet soil quality. That's not the list. We offer like 137 different practices. They're not all for soil quality or water quality, but we have a huge suite of practices that we use to address our resource concerns. So a conservation crop rotation, growing a diverse number of crops in a planned sequence in order to increase soil organic matter and biodiversity in the soil. Cover crop is an unharvested crop grown as part of a planned rotation to provide conservation benefits to the soil. No-till, a way of growing crops without disturbing the soil through tillage. Mulching is applying plant residues or other suitable materials to the soil surface to compensate for loss of residue due to excessive tillage. And nutrient management is managing soil nutrients to meet crop needs while minimizing the impact on the environment and the soil. And all of those practices would help with soil quality. The next one is a really big one here in Connecticut. It's water quality. And the goal is to improve water quality through implementation of practices on farmsteads and fields to reduce sediment, nutrient, and pathogens running off the surface water and infiltrating to groundwater. So we have practices that address waste storage facilities, covered heavy use areas, and composting facilities on a farmstead. The cover crop field activities could be cover crop, nutrient management, crop rotation, reduced no-till plantings, and filter strips. And pasture activities for livestock may include fencing, watering facilities, forage plantings, prescribed grazing. So water quantity, again, another really important priority here in Connecticut. Seems to be more important when we've had 2 or 3 dry years in a row. And we've had a few of those. And then the last couple of years we've had little more rain and it wasn't quite as dry. So we see that this goes up and down, this priority, but we can use cover crops and mulching, irrigation pipeline, micro irrigation, structure for water control, which would be a water meter, and an irrigation water management plan to help with water quantity issues. Air quality. The goal of air quality is to improve air quality by addressing particulate matter, ozone precursors, odor, greenhouse gases, and carbon sequestration. And we can achieve those goals through anaerobic digesters, composting facilities, conservation cover, field border and hedgerow plantings, integrated pest management, nutrient management, prescribed grazing, residue and tillage management. Another priority that we have is a degraded plant condition, and the goal of this priority is to improve plant productivity and health, plant composition, and reducing plant pest pressure. The practices that could help achieve this priority is integrated pest management, high tunnel systems, nutrient management, prescribed grazing, crop rotation, cover crop, mulching, brush management, herbaceous weed treatment. Another EQIP priority here in Connecticut is animal concerns. And the goal under animal concerns is to improve conditions for livestock and wildlife by addressing limitations on feed, forage, and water, as well as habitat. And for livestock animals, forage and biomass plantings, livestock watering systems, wells, pipeline, watering facility, fencing, prescribed grazing plans. Those are all addressed as livestock animals. And for wildlife, we can achieve this goal through early successional habitat plantings, pollinator plantings, invasive plant control, structures for wildlife, which could be bird houses, brush piles, wetland creation, enhancement, restoration. So all of those practices would benefit wildlife. Another EQIP priority here in Connecticut is inefficient energy use, and the goal is to increase on-farm energy efficiency in facilities and fields. And within the facility, we offer energy conservation practices such as lighting, plate coolers, ventilation and fans, irrigation pumps, grain dryers, and other greenhouse improvements. Maple syrup evaporators, heating and refrigeration units, insulation and building envelope sealing, and motor controls and a variable frequency drive motors. And then in the field energy conservation practices may be no-till plantings to reduce diesel fuel use, cover crops to incorporate legumes and decrease fertilizer, nutrient management, an application of appropriate nutrients, the use of manure rather than fertilizer, and improved irrigation with efficient pumps and variable frequency drive pumps. So talked about the priorities, and in order to achieve those priorities, our program, through our program, our applicants would have to be eligible. And there's 3 parts to eligibility. The first part is called the person eligibility. So a person, a legal entity, an Indian tribe, an Alaskan Native corporation, or a joint operation with signature authority who is an agricultural producer, and that includes forest owners, has control of the land, you either own it or you lease it, and is compliant with the highly erodible land conservation, wetland conservation, that's the HELCWC, and adjusted gross income, AGI, according to FSA. The Farm Service Agency makes the determinations on adjusted gross income, and they determine who's meets that and who doesn't. And they'll let us know. And if that person is compliant with that and they have control of the land and their producer, they meet the person eligibility. For land eligibility, it has to be agricultural land, non-industrial private forest land, privately owned, tribal land, or public land if it meets additional criteria and the applicant is not a public entity. So that public land, if it's being owned, operated, like through a lease, and it's part of another producer's operation, that public land would be eligible land to have conservation practices installed or implemented through our EQIP program. Resource eligibility, and this is really important. The land has to have an eligible resource concern. There has to be, I hate to use the word, but there has to be a resource concern or problem that exists that can be addressed by an eligible EQIP practice. So we don't do like new energy, we don't do, our practices need to address an existing resource concern. So a little summary of all this, you know, our EQIP program, our applications are accepted continuously. Here in Connecticut, we have 5 service centers. The addresses and the phone numbers and contact information is on our Connecticut NRCS webpage. So we do take applications year-round. Then the applications are batched up into sign-up periods, and we'll have at least 2 or 3 a year where we collect all the applications, and then all of the eligible applications are assessed, ranked using a standard tool. So they're ranked against everybody that might be in that pool, selected for funding based on priority and ranking score. And then once selected for funding, a final conservation plan and a schedule of operations will be signed by the producer and NRCS, which outlines the practices to be installed, the timeline for implementation, and payment amounts. And the payment amounts are based on a payment schedule, and they're called like a cost share. It's I'm gonna say it's a lot like a coupon. You get paid so much to do the practice, and that's how the payments are determined. And that would be put in a contract with the landowner. And then payments are made after practices are installed and NRCS certifies that they meet NRCS standards and specifications. So when a contract is developed for a landowner, they're going to be getting standards and specs that they have to meet. It could be a job sheet, it could be a design, but there'll be technical guidance provided to the landowner on what the expectations are. There's several opportunities for leveraging partner contributions under EQIP. Technical assistance is available from NRCS on public lands, regardless of the operator. It could be private or public. Partner technical assistance has been used under programs like the Working Lands for Wildlife, which is the New England Cottontail, to share expertise of partner and NRCS with private landowners. So we can provide technical assistance, and we do provide technical assistance to everyone in Connecticut, public land, private land, regardless of who the operator is. Financial assistance may only be made to private individuals, as I mentioned in the previous slide. It could be on public land if the land is part of the private individual's operation. And matching funds, EQIP funds can be matched against other fund sources except for other USDA funds. So 319 funds have been used to assist with large animal waste projects. That's one example where we've partnered with DEEP and the conservation districts. So that kind of wraps up the EQIP program. After you've been through the EQIP program, the next program after that is a great opportunity, or you don't necessarily have to go through EQIP, but the Conservation Stewardship Program helps agricultural producers maintain and improve their existing conservation systems and adopt additional conservation activities to address priority resource concerns. So participants can earn a conservation stewardship program payment for conservation performance. The higher the performance, the higher the payment. So once you've completed a conservation practice and you've got all your resource concerns addressed, then you could enter the conservation stewardship program and you could do some additional enhancements on that land and then earn a performance payment for doing the best and motivating the rest is the motto for conservation stewardship program. So it is a great opportunity to get rewarded for being at a high level of stewardship and then doing some additional enhancements that might address other resource concerns on the property. So that's a great opportunity. We've been promoting that. There's a lot of opportunity in here in Connecticut if producers completed a comprehensive nutrient management plan on the farm, or if they've completed a forest management plan, then they could go to a little higher level and still get some payments. And then I wanted to wrap up before we have questions on the Healthy Forest Reserve Program. It's a very unique program currently here in Connecticut. It's only being offered through the RCPP, the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. We're hoping to get into more projects through additional RCPP projects or agreements with entities. And through that, they can offer the Healthy Forest Reserve Program. And this helps landowners restore, enhance, and protect forest land resources on private and tribal lands through easements and financial assistance. And through the Healthy Forest Reserve Program, landowners promote the recovery of endangered or threatened species, improve plant and animal biodiversity, and enhance carbon sequestration. So we've been dabbling a little bit with this program in the last few years through the RCPP. We hope that we can move forward on some additional agreements that will allow us to get into more projects. But this would be an easement on forest land to address resource concerns that focus around an endangered or threatened species. So it'd have to be maintaining that habitat, developing it and maintaining that habitat for an identified endangered or threatened species, or and to improve the plant and animal biodiversity. So we've been moving forward on that, and there's lots of opportunities. We haven't brought one to completion yet. It's a long process, as with any easement acquisition. It's quite a long process. I'm developing a forest restoration plan that would address that species that you want to manage for. So it's very technical, and get a lot of input from technical experts on that plan, and that plan goes with the land. So there's an expectation that if you're going to manage for a species and it requires something to be done every 3 years or 10 years or 20 years, that after that period of time that activity will have taken place, so the species that you're trying to protect can take advantage of that created habitat. So I'm going to go into questions now. I know Amy and Rebecca have a few written ones. I can't see the chat on my screen. It's just the way I'm displaying it, but I'll be happy to entertain some questions.
Yeah, Joyce, we've gotten a few through the chat here, so let me knock those out first, and then we can move to some of the ones that we got in earlier. But we had a question about EQIP from Paul. Do they need to have a conservation plan before applying to EQIP?
Do they need to have a conservation plan before applying to what?
Oh, before applying for EQIP.
No, they don't. We would work with them to develop that conservation plan, and then I know I did say that becomes the basis for the application. We really like to be working with landowners as much as possible prior to the application period, because it can become compressed, and you know, it could be snowing, so, or something like that, where we might not be able to do a really good assessment. So we'd like to work with landowners prior to signing up for an application, but it's not a hard and fast requirement. The more the earlier we can develop a conservation plan and work on your goals and objectives and do the assessment at the right time of the year, like I said, not when there's 12 inches of snow on the ground or something like that, it becomes a better plan. But no, you don't necessarily need to have that.
Great. And then another question on EQIP, and I apologize if we get some feedback here. I'm on competing Zoom calls, but do meadows on ag land that's not farmed on private land meet EQIP guidelines?
A meadow, yes, it would meet the EQIP guidelines, yes.
Excellent. That was from Vicky. And then we had two questions from one from Kathleen and one from Anne that are kind of, I think, hand in hand. One is can you talk about some examples of CSPs that have been successful in Connecticut, and how has it been used in Connecticut as well?
Okay. Here in Connecticut, with forest management plans, we've worked with landowners that have completed forest management plans on their property. They might have done some thinning, something along that line. And then after they've completed that, they can enroll in CSP, and they might want to no longer be as concerned about their plant health because they've thinned their trees and they're managing their plant health, their trees there. They might want to manage for wildlife, and they could establish some patch cuts where they could remove some trees and establish some kind of vegetation for another type of wildlife species, a bird or a rabbit or something along that line, and manage for that. They could put in pollinator plantings if they want to increase the amount of insects and pollinators using the area. So those would be enhancements. It's above and beyond maybe meeting the resource concern of plant vigor. And now they want to enhance the area with additional practices that meet other objectives, such as, wildlife. So that would be one example where we've taken, or not would take, but we've worked with individuals that have taken their forest management plan and incorporated wildlife into it, because often a forest management plan just addresses the forest, and yet there could be some other opportunities to have some grasslands for birds, some patch cuts for small mammals and birds, pollinators.
Excellent. So Kathleen and Anne, let us know in the chat if you have any follow-up questions to that. We did get a question from Tim asking if there's a minimal amount of acreage required for any of these programs.
No, they're size neutral. Our programs are size neutral, so there's you're ranked on the resource concern, and the size of the parcel doesn't matter.
Awesome. I do want to point out that Joe Welsh from Shelton Land Trust mentioned that they received NRCS funding through the old WIP program in 2005 and 2009. So he's happy to talk more about that. So if you want to connect with him to talk a little bit more about what they did to combat invasive plants and improve early successional habitat, feel free to reach out to Amy or myself and we'll connect you. So let me pop back over to some of the questions that we got ahead of time, just to make sure these folks get them answered as well. Can you talk a little bit about the guidelines around invasive species management and how that kind of relates to some of these programs, or how it may relate to some of these programs, Joyce? We got quite a few questions about that.
Well, yes, invasive plants are a big problem here in Connecticut. Anytime you do any land disturbance, they just look at that opportunity to sneak in and try to take over. Under the EQIP program, we do have some practices for invasive plant control. If you have a forest and forest land and you're treating the land using another practice, you can use, you're doing timber stand improvement, and then afterwards you would probably follow up with some invasive plant control methods. You can do that through EQIP. And then also they broaden the opportunity. If there's other parts of the parcel, same parcel, but you might not have done timber stand improvement, but you do have some invasive plants migrating or taking over in that part of the parcel, we could address them there as well. Invasive plants along field edges, in fields, we can help by, mowing. It's really up to the landowner, should they want to use mechanical control, chemical control. Our policy is to have the least, the most cost effective, the least cost practice. It would be our recommendation. And so a lot of times when we do make recommendations, if a landowner wishes to do something above and beyond, we would only pay for the least cost practice, and he or she would have to absorb the difference between the two methods of control on their own. But we often, most of our forest work will include invasive plants. We'd love to see more pristine forests, but the minute they get manipulated, and they've been manipulated several times in the last couple hundred years, it's just been natural for invasive plants to come in. Other animals bring them in, birds bring them in, human disturbance brings them in. But we do have some opportunities to control invasive plants. And we always, that's a resource concern. You don't have the right kind of plant health there. It's not the desired plant. So we'd like to see native plants and not non-native invasive plants.
Excellent. And if anyone has some more follow-ups about anything that Joyce just covered around that, please feel free again to enter that through the chat. We've got a couple more questions that came through from Barbara. Regarding application process, you mentioned that projects are accepted based on priority and ranking. Are there specific priorities for each batch period, or is it all the priorities you mentioned?
It's all the priorities that I mentioned, and you're ranked against that very same priority. So if the priority is soil health, you'd be ranked under the soil health priority pool. If your priority is water quality, you would be ranked against applications that address water quality. And you may be ranked in more than one, because what you're doing on your parcel might address plant health and water quality. Or you might have some plant health practices, and then you've got an area that's cropped and you want to address soil health. So, but you're ranked again by the priorities. So each priority has its own ranking tool, and there's scores associated with each ranking tool, and the highest ones in each priority area get selected and funded, depending on funding availability. And here in Connecticut, we've been very lucky over the last few years that we've been able to reach most of our applications, because we've had very good funding, and we hope that continues.
Rebecca, we can't hear you. Rebecca, we couldn't hear you at all. You want me to read the question? I'll read Connie's question while you get your sound back on. Okay, so the next question was from Connie. I'm wondering, is there a cap to the amount of assistance one party can receive per year through EQIP?
Okay, the cap on financial assistance, a contract cannot exceed $450,000. So that's in that given farm bill. So this is the 2018 farm bill. So an applicant, a land trust, a landowner would be entitled to $450,000 under EQIP. That might be in 1 year. That's pretty ambitious if it's all in 1 year, but it can be broken out over 5 years. So the life of the farm bill, $450,000. We have one or two other programs with organic where it's $80,000 a year. I don't think we need to worry about that, but if you're an organic producer and you signed up for organic only, it would be $80,000 a year. And then with agricultural management assistance, it's $40,000 a year. So there is a cap, but it's a pretty high cap to do EQIP practices.
Okay, and I'm going to read one more, and then hopefully Rebecca is available one more time, I hope, because she's got the other questions. We'll figure it out. The next question that came in was from Vicky. Are the EQIP Connecticut priorities published anywhere?
Yes, they should be on our Connecticut NRCS webpage. If they're not there, I'm going to check when I get off, but they should be there. They are should be on our EQIP page. So yes, they should be on our Connecticut NRCS homepage.
All right, and I'm hoping you can hear me now.
I can.
Excellent. Sorry, we're having some funny tech moments today. So Paul asked, is there a reimbursement rate table that we can review? Rates for linear feet of fencing, fence line clearing, that kind of thing. Is that an available resource?
Yes, Paul, and it is on our Connecticut webpage. It's under eFOTOG, which means Electronic Field Office Technical Guide. It's what they call payment scenarios. I believe it's in section 2, and there's 1,155 lines to the payment schedule. So what that means is that our 130 some practices, there's more than one scenario for that. So if you're doing brush management, there might be light brush management, medium brush management, heavy brush management. So now we have 3 lines or 3 payment scenarios, and that's how it all added up to be 1,155 lines, because I just took a look at it before this presentation. So yes, it's on our Connecticut homepage, eFOTOG, EFOTG, Electronic Field Office Technical Guide.
Excellent. And I'm going to pull that up. Oh, thank you so much, Kathleen. Kathleen actually just posted that link in the chat. I was just trying to find that, so thank you. We'll go ahead and make sure that we send that out with our follow-up email along with the slides from this presentation, and we'll get this recording up shortly as well, just for all that are wondering. I'll jump back to some of our previous questions here. And apologize, I'm just finding the ones I had before. Can you talk a little bit about the lifespan of projects, Joyce? Really what happens during the process, what happens after an EQIP project begins, and just sort of that whole process, that timeline.
Okay, each practice has a lifespan. It might be 3 years, it might be an annual, it might be a 1 year, it might be 3 years, it might be 5, might be 10 or 15. Our structural practices have a longer lifespan expectation because, of course, they are structural in nature. So when you are contracted to do a practice, you're given a job sheet, and there's a lifespan that's indicated in the contract and on your job sheet that tells you how to operate and maintain that practice. So it's the expectation that you operate and maintain that practice for the life of the lifespan. You're reimbursed for installing it. Even when the contract ends, if that lifespan is beyond the contract, there's still an expectation that you will continue to operate and maintain it for the typical lifespan. Sometimes they last longer, a lot longer, but someone had to come up with a number to determine what the typical lifespan of a practice would be. So some practices might be 3 years or 5 years. Some of them are annual practices, like mowing. You mow it once a year, so you can't expect that that mowing that you did in 1 year is going to last 10 years. It's got a lifespan of 1 year. Something like a fence has a 15-year lifespan. So you put up a fence according to our standards and specs. It's our expectation that it would be operated and maintained for 15 years because you've followed our standards and specs. But the contract could have ended after year 5, but you still have that expectation.
Great. We got a few questions in about trail improvements and trail management and how that may relate to some of the NRCS programs. So again, yeah, Joyce, if you can speak on that, especially as folks may have that obligation or that plan with their OSWA grant programs as well.
Understood. Trail improvements, trail maintenance, those kinds of things, unless there's some kind of resource concern that we could help with, is really on the easement holder or the landowner, however, whoever's managing that land. We do not, create trails, but if there was a resource concern on the trail, there might be a possibility that we could help with that resource concern. I'm thinking of perhaps there's a trail that goes over a stream or something like that, and there's what we call a hanging culvert. So the culvert is hanging in the air, and maybe the fish can't move from one side of the culvert to the other, go upstream that is, because it's hanging in the air. That might be something we could help with, but normal trail maintenance, it's just that, it's maintenance, and it's not something that we would address unless it's a resource concern, erosion or wildlife habitat, like with the fish, something along the lines like that. And that's where walking the property with the landowner or the land manager to look at what some of the resource concerns are to help identify them. That's what we like to do.
And I've been kind of wondering this myself. Maybe it's because I'm a Connecticut transplant recently, but what is the best way to kind of contact your local NRCS office or to, get an agent out there on the land with you?
Okay, like I said earlier, we do have 5 service centers here in Connecticut. They're in Hamden, they're in Torrington, Windsor, Danielson, and Norwich. Our address, phone number, and contact information for district conservationists are posted on our Connecticut home webpage. And so you would find that information there.
Excellent. And I'm just trying to see if we missed any through the chat. If you do have any more in the chat, again, please feel free to send them in here.
So I know that there are some other questions that came in through email, and I think Rebecca is probably scanning for those now. This is not a particularly large group. If you want to show yourselves on video, I think we can probably unshare the screen now, and then we'll be better able to see others. And so that works for us. If you'd like to put your video on. Meanwhile, Rebecca, I know that there's some other questions that came in through email in advance that we have yet to pose. There was one in particular that came in, I believe, this morning, and there might have been others.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So just looking at these, Amy, there was a question about forest stand or improving forest stands and cutting and clear cutting. So I think we may have touched a little bit on this when we talked about invasives, but Joyce, if you could talk a little bit more about some of the forest management and forest, I guess, timber harvesting, along with clear potential problems that may come up with clear cutting or with management of that.
Okay, so anytime you do a clear cut, it's an opportunity for invasives to come in. So a lot of times on clear cuts, there may be some seed stock trees left to provide feed for regeneration. Depending on what was there, it may naturally regenerate. Unfortunately, often invasives take advantage of that opportunity to move in as well. I'm not quite sure if I understand what, if clear cutting is necessary as part of a forest management plan, if it's clear cutting has been identified as a practice, perhaps to provide an open area for wildlife, and then it's there could be some seedings, vegetative as well as woody vegetation introduced, depending on the species they're trying to manage for. So I'm not quite sure if I understand the question clearly, but in order to enroll for forestry practices under EQIP, you have to have a forest management plan that's less than 10 years old, that's been prepared by a Connecticut forester. So those practices that are in that forest management plan may be eligible for EQIP. And if it's clear cutting as one of the timber harvest management or one of the practices that we offer through EQIP that address that resource concern, it may be a practice that we can work with the landowner on. Do we just offer clear cutting, not without a forest management plan recommending it for a good reason? What is the intent? What resource concern is it going to be addressing?
Hi, Joyce, this is Amy. Just by way of follow-up, I think based upon a couple of those questions that had come in that context, I think it would be good to clarify whether or not trees need to come down as part of the EQIP program, and some clarification there. If you want to do invasives work, does that also mean that there is some sort of prerequisite that some trees have to come down? I think fleshing that out a little bit would be helpful as well.
In order to do invasive plant control on forest land, there has to be some kind of timber management. And that invasive plant control can be associated with that timber management, and also can be associated with land on that parcel where maybe you're not removing trees, but the invasive plants are also in that area as well. So that area you might not have to be removing trees, but in the other area you would be conducting some kind of timber management or forest management. So we just don't do invasive plant control on a parcel. We'll do invasive plant control associated with other forest management and also on some associated land.
Great. So a couple of questions that have come through the chat here. Annette from the Hartford Audubon Society mentioned that they do have forests, but did she hear that succession habitat support is available as well?
So if you want to manage for early successional, and that's a possibility to manage for early successional species. So you might have to be cutting 5 or 10 or 20 years or whatever to maintain that early successional. So if the question is, do we assist with early successional management? Yes, there's that possibility if that's the goal, to manage for a certain wildlife species.
Great. Ben asks in the chat, is there a compiled list summarizing all of these grant programs and deadlines? So is there a resource to direct everyone to here?
Yes, our Connecticut NRCS homepage on the web is where we post all our announcements. It's a great resource. It has a very short description of each program, It has technical information as well in our electronic field office technical guide. So it's really a good place to go for all your, a good start to go for all your information. We try to keep it updated as often as we possibly can to make sure that the public knows current deadlines and payment rates. And so yes, it's updated as frequently as we possibly can get it updated with new dates.
Great.
So the Connecticut NRCS webpage.
Excellent. And we'll provide a link to that as well in our follow-up email. Sally asks from the Simsbury Land Trust, they had an EQIP grant for barberry clearing that worked really well, but now they have a lot of garlic mustard coming through. So would their prior EQIP grant affect the ranking for another EQIP project?
No, it wouldn't. That prior contract addressed a certain type of resource concern. Now there's another resource concern. I certainly would contact our service center to come out and see if there's some ways that we can help with the garlic mustard control. But no, if you've got one, you could have another EQIP contract on a same piece of land, possibly to address something different, or on a budding land, or on another tract of land on the other side of town. We have a lot of our landowners might have more than one EQIP contract.
Great. And Anne asks, are there best management practices that are published somewhere? So for example, they have a meadow enhancement project. So is there a way that they can research those best management practices so they know what they would be expected to take on?
Again, I would go to our Connecticut website. We do have a lot of good information, resource and technical information on that. Kind of shop around to see what practices they feel might help with their meadow enhancement. And also, talking to one of our field conservationists could help them. But our Connecticut website has a lot of good technical information on it that probably could be useful.
Great. I did want to touch on a question that we got earlier, also from the Hartford Audubon Society. They said that they asked, would land that neighbors their property be able to work in concert to remove Phragmites while using funds from one of the conservation programs? And then we also got another question about neighborhood participation in maintaining land trust properties and surrounding lands. So how can some of those sort of neighboring lands and land trusts maybe work together or work through these EQIP projects?
Well, that's a wonderful way to manage a resource concern, because it probably doesn't stop at the property line. So getting more than one landowner involved to address that resource concern is a really great way to help control that, if it's the spread of Phragmites or something like that. So yes, we can work with multiple landowners to address a resource concern. The neighborhood, I'm not quite sure, but what they meant by the neighborhood. But anyway, yes, we can work with multiple landowners. They can, as long as they're eligible land, have eligible land and they're eligible landowners.
Excellent. And then there's a question more specifically that came in, and apologies if you touched on some of this already, Joyce, but is there funding that would potentially cover restoration of woods around a vernal pool versus meadow grass as recommended in the properties management plan? So again, that restoration of woodland habitat around a vernal pool rather than grass meadow.
Yes, we have riparian forest buffers, and that practice would be woody vegetation. And if that's the best practice that's needed to protect that vernal pool, it is one of our eligible practices that we cost share on. So yes, we do offer woody riparian buffers. Sounds to me around a vernal pool, that's probably what you would need, is a practice called a riparian buffer.
Excellent.
And yes, that's one of our eligible practices.
And I think that just about covers all of the questions we did get in advance. Again, if there are any other questions you all have, please feel free to either put them in through the chat or now at this point, if you're more comfortable unmuting and asking the question directly as well.
Should we do a going once, going twice, seeing none? I'm going to put my video back on. Here I am. So I would say that, first of all, thank you, Joyce and Carol, who was in the background, I know, being very much aware of what was going on here. And we thank you very much for your time and your sharing your expertise on these resources that might be useful for our land trusts and municipal conservation communities. And like Rebecca said, we'll be posting follow-up information both on our resource page, including the recording of this session, as well as the PowerPoint. So you will have all of that available to you. And then, of course, you also know now where to find Joyce and Carol if you need them. So with that, I'll do again, going once, going twice. We have a little time left in this session, but seeing none, we'll bid everybody a great day and try to get outside. It looks like a beauty out there. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Amy.
Thanks, everyone.
Joyce and Carol, we usually hang on for a little bit and just wait to see if there's any lingering questions. But thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you. Very interesting questions, and it's really nice that you offer this to answer their questions, Amy.
Well,
Hey, it's Joe here to chime in with my 2 cents. So I put one last comment with a link to the public water supply watershed maps that are available. So for the additional payment, if there's a project in a drinking water supply, that's a great reference because it has the watersheds throughout the state. And then I think on DEEP's website, there's mapping for aquifer protection areas, which might be helpful as well if a project's located in those areas.
Thanks, Joe. You know, we'll make sure that we add that to the resources just in case, you know, folks were getting off and they didn't hear your comments or see it. So we'll make sure that we have that information available as well. Thanks for adding that.
Okay, great. Have a good day. I'm off to another meeting.
Thanks, Joe. You too.
Thank you. Hi, Joyce. Thanks.
Hi. Well, thank you, Amy. Thank you, Carol, for being there in case I messed up. And
Great.
thank you, Rebecca, for pulling this all together. Awesome job. First time I've used